Whenever you're done with that.
No, I'm sure he'll...
Is there any time that the Navis felt unholy?
That what?
They felt unholy, the prophets felt unholy.
What do you mean?
Like, did they have...
Do you mean did they have downtime?
Downtime.
Certainly. Yes.
Where they felt detached from Hashem.
Whenever they were not able to sustain their calm and their happiness, they lost their prophecy. It's something which can't be sustained except by Moshe Rabbeinu on a constant basis. Something which you have to be in a special frame of mind for. So of course there were times when they weren't, were they like us? No, that couldn't be. But they were certainly, relatively speaking, down low as opposed to on a constant high.
Where do we fit into that spectrum today?
We're off the charts.
Off the charts.
Yeah.
According to your moron theory, we have never had more yeshivas before in our life. I mean, there's some...
Right, we've never had more institutions with more morons. It's amazing.
No, but I think we're so broken because we've been through the gulls.
What?
We're so broken because we've been through the gulls and we're still going...
So what? What's that to... He was asking whether Navi was always on a high or sometimes came down low. And then he asked about our generation, how we rate compared to the Nevi'im.
Oh, because I was talking about the moron theory of our generation.
Yeah. Why don't you tell him how we relate to the Nevi'im?
We don't have any Nevi'im.
No, I'm saying how our status relative to the status.
Close.
Not even close, right? Not even far, right? So we're but I repeat every so often. I guess it bears repeating now that Reb Tzadok says in the name of the Rebbe Rabbunia Pashischa that even though the generations are becoming lower and lower, the pnimius becomes higher and higher.
The what?
Pnimius, the inner essence. Meaning that, we don't know exactly what he means by that, or there are various different theories about what he means, but it seems that what he means is that we are judged according to our capacity, and based on our extremely limited mental and emotional capacity, so we are able to accomplish far more than the previous generation could. And that's to our credit that we get done what we do get done, and that's why that's why the Geula can come now, even if it didn't come in earlier generations, because relatively speaking, we're doing not badly. There is no precedent, I don't think, in the deepest, darkest days of the Roman Empire and its decadence, were there any tests anywhere near the test which you have today. So there it is. Whatever we accomplish is an extraordinary, extraordinary accomplishment. I think that's what the Rebbe Rabbunim meant. Does that make you feel a little bit better?
Absolutely.
Okay, good. We're all banking on that. In the meantime, oh, sure.
I know, like you often hear that, like in like Europe and the old countries like that, like things used to be much better. That like
it's a lie.
That everybody was from and everything.
It's a lie. Don't believe it. Okay. It's an abject lie.
So how was it?
No point at which was
not after the mid 19th century. Yeah. I have an article now which is in the pipeline to be published in the one of the Jewish Observer, which is the monthly magazine of the Agudas Yisrael of America, and it's about how the German influence of Toim Derech Eretz saved Eastern European, Lithuanian, and Polish Judaism during the period between the two world wars. And this is something which there was a great debate as to whether to publish it or not publish it. It's still not published. And hopefully it will be published eventually, because of this great myth that everybody in Europe was very holy and very frum and everything was great, and this article debunks that perspective. The overwhelming majority of Jews in Lithuania were not Shomer Shabbos after the turn of the century. Things were very, very bad. Perhaps even as bad as they are in America today. So it's a myth. So it's the one of the basic myths which they feed, which we feed ourselves. I guess would be the way to put it, but it's not true. My grandfather went to visit Warsaw in 1938. He lived in Switzerland, and he wrote a letter to friends of his in Lithuania. He was originally from Lithuania, and he said in Warsaw there were 40 Jewish restaurants, one of which you could eat for sure, and one of which maybe you could eat, and the other 38 you couldn't eat. Okay, so that means that
It's worse than,
what?
that's worse than some places here.
It's worse than some places here. Yeah, that's right. So so probably there was some proportion there. I mean, that means that Jewish restaurants, 1 out of 40 was okay. So it's 2.5%. That's pretty low. Yeah.
Can you just give like short key points of what would you think that the like workforce in Lithuania is saying Jewry percent?
Which one?
Did you just mention that like that Torah from their Harris saved clothes to a certain extent in Europe? Like, could you give quick key points why?
Because the school system, the main problem was that the educational system either collapsed or was non-existent. By that I mean that there was no, well, we discussed this when we were talking about women, there was no education at all for women, and the education for boys, to the extent that it existed, was a haphazard, informal affair, the cheder system. So the organizational skills of the German Jews who follow in the footsteps of Shalom Shmuel Hirscher, Azriel Hildesheimer, and others, who came to Eastern Europe during World War I, when the Germans conquered Poland and Lithuania, they laid the groundwork for a modern educational system for Lithuanian and Polish Jewry, which was able to save whoever they were able to save in the period between the wars. And without that educational system, nobody would have survived. It's important to know that even though there are great yeshivas in Lithuania, there were tremendous, awesome yeshivas in Lithuania and in Poland, they catered to a relatively small segment of the population. Like you said before, they were very Shlomo, right? Yeah. Shlomo said before that there's never been a time when so many people are learning Torah like today. In Lithuania, the big yeshivas were 400 people, which is nice and big, but doesn't compare to Lakewood or the Meir. So in reality, you had the small elite, which was in the yeshiva world, and the great masses were ignorant and were sometimes not observant either. So the yeshivas were the reason why the impression is skewed is because in yeshivas we relate the history of yeshivas. And therefore we come away with the impression that everything was rosy and glorious. But in fact, in the yeshivas it was pretty good, but outside the yeshivas there was devastation. The assimilation was rampant, incredible. Yeah.
Why is it common knowledge that in Germany there was mass assimilation, or in Lithuania it doesn't seem like most people know that? They think it was flourishing and the like. Why is there a difference between what people think of Germany and what they think of Lithuania?
Well, part of it's to do with the intrinsic disdain with which the Eastern Europeans view the Western Europeans. Okay, that's part of it. Another part of it is reform and conservative. That is very, since as Rabbi Tendler mentioned to me, this is really a course in Jewish history, masquerading as a course in Navi. I guess this is important to go into for a moment, which is sorry, Rabbi Tendler, I didn't know if you wanted that so explicit. But in any event, it is the genius of Or Sameach to kill two birds with one stone, right? Called Navi and teach history. Okay, so in Israel today, there are secular Jews and Orthodox Jews. There are almost no Reform and conservative Jews. Right? There's a big difference. A secular Jew knows that Reform and conservative are non-authentic. In other words, the shul which he doesn't daven at is an Orthodox shul, right? So that, but the Reform and Conservative, they smell this is not really authentic Judaism. The same thing was true in Lithuania. In Lithuania, there were secular Jews and there were Orthodox Jews. There was no Reform and Conservative movement. Again, the shul I didn't daven in was an Orthodox shul. In Germany, Reform and Conservative was real, and more Reform than Conservative. Conservative came later, but Conservative is almost a uniquely American phenomenon. But Reform was real and powerful and a majority. So therefore, since there was this alternative movement, they created the impression that in Germany, there is a Reform movement, and then there is Orthodoxy, which is an embattled minority. Whereas since in Lithuania and Poland, there was no alternative movement. There was just, leaving the fold. So therefore, there was it didn't create in certain people's minds the conception, the perception that there was actually, this kind of falling away. Because again, there was no movement to which these people affiliated or belonged. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
I have just two questions. The first question is...
Just two?
Actually, there's more coming, but now it's two.
Okay, yeah.
How come today there's yeshivas that allow boys to go to college and learn a trade? In Europe, the yeshiva system was just learn a whole day.
Well, because the yeshiva serves a different purpose in America than it did in Europe. In Europe, the yeshiva was meant to educate the elite. We spoke about this. In America, the yeshiva system is meant to keep people frum. And since that's the case, at least some yeshivas have to provide for the people who are not going to be the educated, the great elite of the next generation. So they provide for them by having all sorts of programs which you might not find if you were just training the Gedolei Hador for the next generation.
Also, why is in European history you see like a lot of intermarriage, especially in the 1900s to 1900s? In the time of Greek, Greco-Roman time era, where you had Hellenism, you don't have too many people either intermarrying or becoming Hellenists. Why was that?
Because the bulk of the world Jewry was still in the land of Israel. So there weren't too many shiksas to marry. Right? It only was when they spread out when there actually became much more assimilation. Yeah.
You said that prior to the mid 19th century that at the mid 19th century is when people sounded like you were saying, started to become not shops. Was there a time before that when throughout the Middle Ages or wherever in Europe when the majority of the Jews were
yes
shops?
Yeah. There was no exciting alternative, nor was there any social pressure to change, because outside society was also frum, but they were frum Christians, which is a much less appealing frumkeit than Judaism.
Mm-hmm.
So
and so was there much assimilation going on throughout the generations in Europe? I mean, was there we European Jews kind of look somewhat more European than at least ancient Israelis?
I don't think it was so much assimilation. No, it's the other way around. There were conversions, and that's what made people look blonde and light hair. So it's not people entered the fold, it's not so much leaving the fold. So the Jews generally assimilate only when times are good. So, and that's like in Spain, before the expulsion, there was a lot of assimilation. And in Europe, as things were getting better in the mid-19th century and on, there was a lot of assimilation. But before that, there was very little. Somebody else had their hand up before? Yeah.
I put on Talmud Torah and Derek Harris. You mentioned regarding the education, but how did working affect that whole revolution?
No, Torah Derech Eretz, no, it's not the working aspect.
Oh.
It means that the secular training. But because until the late 19th century, generally speaking, if you couldn't make a decent living, and really you didn't have that much alternative by being a farmer, a cobbler, a blacksmith, a store owner, right? There were no such things as accountants. Very few lawyers, right? They didn't exist. But in the late 19th century, as the Eastern Europe became more urban, and as the economy became more modernized, all of a sudden, the good jobs required secular education. And until the Torah Derech Eretz type schools arose to provide that secular education, the only place you could get that was in a non-Jewish institution. So that would lead very often to all sorts of pressures and all sorts of actually aspirations to become assimilated. Okay. Yeah.
It's my understanding, and I guess I'm wrong, that the Enlightenment really didn't reach Eastern Europe like it did Western Europe. Is that not correct?
It reached it later. Actually, there was a... I don't know if it ever reached... let's make this clear. It didn't reach ever the Russian peasants. Right? The Russian peasants remained Russian peasants, and they probably remain Russian peasants to this very day. Right? So that we're not talking about the... What do they call the Russian peasants? There's a word for them. Mujik. Okay, so they remain the same thing to this day. The Jews were the elites, first of all, Russians, in St. Petersburg and lesser extent in Moscow. They were influenced by the West. And if you know your Tolstoy, as a matter of fact, the educated Russians spoke in French among themselves. And but that also didn't have much to do with the Jews, because the Jews were not a part of that society. But among the Jews themselves, in the mid-19th century, there arose a movement called the Haskalah movement. The Haskalah movement was brought about by an influx of German Jewish intellectuals who wanted to save the Eastern European Jews from the morass of ignorance, of secular ignorance, and they're being mired in their backward ways, and therefore they came to try and spread the light of enlightened modern thought. There became two types of, and the Haskalah movement, Haskalah means intelligence. The Haskalah movement had two distinct ramifications. One ramification was that there are certain people who became non-Orthodox because they wanted to pursue an education, a liberal education, and all the ideas which were in vogue at the time, and this was a very idealistic period of human history. There also became within the Orthodox camp a certain degree of Frum Haskalah, which exists to this very day. The Frum Haskalah means that you're aware of perhaps the Greek and Latin origin of words in the Talmud. You know something about the flora and fauna in the Talmud, which most yeshiva bachrim don't really care about. So that Frum Haskalah, it continues to exist. The general Haskalah movement, it really doesn't exist anymore, because there is the world which we live in. The general world is a very non-intellectual world. Nobody's into intellectual pursuits anymore. So therefore, the Jews aren't either. So someday one of my bosses at Art Scroll once said to me that he anticipates that someday there's going to be a backlash, and there's going to be a modern Haskalah movement, because since the yeshivas nowadays don't provide very profound intellectual stimulation outside Gemara, of course, so then someday people are going to rediscover it and are going to be enticed by that intellectual knowledge and those intellectual pursuits which exist out there. I don't think he's right. I think people have stopped thinking for good. There ain't no turning back. But okay, he's certainly entitled to his opinion.
He's hoping his sales are going to go back up.
What?
He's hoping his sales are going to go up.
So
Hasn't Judaism
I see you guys really like learning that.
for
Okay.
centuries though? Hasn't Judaism just been entrenched in ignorance, with the vast majority of people just ignorant? I mean, even before the Middle Ages, people were knowledgeable. My understanding is that people were knowledgeable in things that directly related to them. They knew how to make a matzah. They like personally had a great matzah. They understood like what they had to do once the shofet came to their farm, shepherded the animals, and left. But like in terms of like other things, or like they just didn't have, right?
Right. You never had a generation of Jews which were so knowledgeable, at least Orthodox Jews, as today. There's the most knowledgeable generation in Jewish history. Since the times of first Beis HaMikdash.
Well, in what way? Because there's two types of intelligence.
Because of art scroll.
There's two types of intelligence, though. There's one of like knowing like.
I hope that gets me a raise.
There's one of like knowing how to bake your own matzahs at home, knowing how to do shchita, knowing how to like take the blood out of basar. But like nobody knows that today. As educated as everyone here is, I don't think there's more than 10 people in Muncie that like really like.
True. The practical knowledge of Judaism has become diminished, but the theoretical knowledge of Judaism is much greater than it used to be. In other words, we're talking about the other night, strive for truth. When we talk about the 100 years ago, 150 years ago, for sure, the strive for truth would be considered like the deeper secrets of the Torah. Who had access to that kind of stuff? And today, that's ABC. So in that respect, things have vastly improved.
But didn't they hide some of the Kabbalah by Shabtai Tzvi? I heard they hid some of the Kabbalah stuff.
Yeah, but they hid it from the relatively small group which had it. They made it even more exclusive. But it wasn't a large group. There was never a large group involved in Kabbalistic ideas.
What about Spain?
What about Spain?
Like pre-1492 Spain.
There was an educated elite, but the masses were not particularly educated. It was not like it is today. The closest precedent which we have to today is 19th century Germany. Because 19th century Germany, they were producing, reams and reams and reams of Jewish literature and Jewish periodicals and things like that. But that's the only precedent which we have, and that's in the recent past. Yeah.
What are the?
One second. You have to have access to mass printing in order to be able to do this. In the time when books had to be handwritten, there was no mass access to knowledge. And even when books were printed, but in a very rudimentary way, there was no way to do this. You had to have the Industrial Revolution in order to be able to have massive access to text and to knowledge. Yeah.
What was the definition of an Amaretz for the Tanoim or Amoraim? When they say Atava Amaretz in the Gemara,
it's a big machlokas among the Tanoim and Amoraim. What's considered to be an Amaretz?
Really?
Yeah.
But it's like because I thought at one point maybe even though we are like the one generation, that I thought still like even still, but like for the fact that we have this abundance and of Torah and the spread of the Torah, the way it's come around the world, that we actually might not be qualified according to me their standards or their definition of Amaretz because of like the different Torah knowledge we have.
So I mean, we have far fewer Amoratzim today.
Yeah.
It's quite possible.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
I guess prior to like this generation, throughout the ages, what kind of knowledge did the Jews have? Did they learn Chumash, or what did they actually learn, if anything?
Well, there were in each town in, say, Eastern Europe, and this is true even in Sephardi countries in many places, there were different levels of knowledge among the tradesmen and the artisans and the farmers. Communities had a chevra shas, which would learn actually Gemara, a chevra mishnayis, which would learn mishnayis, a chevra tehillim, which would just say tehillim. So the people were trying to do whatever they could, but it was generally considered to be a rarity that a balabas, a person who was a lay person, would be learning Gemara, certainly in depth. As a matter of fact, there was a sefer which is today almost extinct, which is the Ein Yaakov. The Ein Yaakov is a compilation of all of the Agadatas, all of the stories and non-halachic material in Gemara, which was much more popular among the masses than Gemara itself, which has these long and boring discussions. the fact that we people learn Daf Yomi today, in myriad period people learn Daf Yomi, is an amazing revolution. So that was not taking place in Europe. Want to do some nach? Anybody? Those of you who have Sfarim. We are in Shoftim, actually, and we are...
No, I don't even know what to label this year now.
That makes me happy when you have that problem. That's that. So we're in the middle of the fifth parak, and we talked about the critique of the tribes that should not come to fight the war against Sisera, and we're up to page Ayin Aleph, Pasuk Chaf Aleph, and it said when they went to war, it says that the armies of Sisera were swept away by Nachal Kishon, the Kishon River. Nachal Kedumim, an ancient river. Nachal Kishon is the river of Kishon. Tidrechi nafshi oz. May my soul step on the powerful enemies of our nation, the Canaanites. And we mentioned already before, I'm not going to speak about it again, that there is a parallel between the chariots of Egypt, which were 600 in number, and the chariots of Sisera, which were 900 in number, and the chariots of Egypt were swept away by the Red Sea, and the chariots of Sisera were swept away by the Kishon River. Just very briefly, there's a symbolism here. The power and might of the non-Jews is swept away by the water, which symbolizes Torah. So therefore, Hashem very often uses water in order to eliminate evil. So much so that Titus, when God set up a tidal wave which was going to sink his ship as he was on the way back from the destruction of Jerusalem, so Titus said, "Oh, this God only has power in the water." And that's why he always attacks people with water. And so Hashem's, there's a pretty smart move on Titus's part to say that, because he didn't drown. Hashem let him come up on the land, and then he died a slow and torturous death over the course of several years. So the point is that there's a symbolism here where the enemies of the Jewish people are destroyed by water. There's another symbolism which Reb Tzadok brings down, which is that water represents in taiva, desire. Fire represents anger or zealotry, and water represents desire or lust. And therefore, we know that the salient bad trait of the Canaanites was their immorality and their lusty behavior. So therefore, their being drowned in water is also a symbol of them, so to speak, getting punished with that which they themselves were afflicted. The Egyptians and Canaanites were very related in this respect. They're also, I think, biologically related, that they were both nations which represent great lust and desire, and water, which represents that lust and desire, is what takes hold of them and punishes them and destroys them. Okay, let's go on to the next pasuk. Pasuk Chabez. Az hamu ikvei sus. Then there were removed the hoofs of the horses. Midaros daros abirov, from the gallopings, the what's the word? The spurrings on of the knights, or of the horsemen of Sisera and his armies. So they spurred them on very quickly to try and get them to pursue the Jews and destroy them. But in fact, what happened was that they led themselves down to their own doom, where then they were swept away from the waters of the Kishon River. Then in Pasuk Chav Gimel, she says a very strange thing. She says, Oru me rose, Amar Melach Hashem. Cursed is May Rose, said the agent of Hashem. Oru Yoshveh, accursed are its inhabitants. Ki lo bo le'ezes Hashem b'giborim, because they didn't come to the le'ezes Hashem b'giborim. They didn't come to assist God with His warriors who are fighting against the armies of Sisera. So this pasuk, I forgot. I left out a pasuk at the beginning. Sorry, pasuk Chaf we didn't do yet. Chaf Aleph is important to learn. Chaf Gimel relates back to Chaf. Take a look at back at Chaf. He says, it says there that Mina Shamayim Yilchamu HaKochavim Mimsilosam, from the heavens the stars fought from their pathways. Yilchamu Im Sisra, they fought with Sisera. We did do this pasuk, but yesterday, the day before, whatever. But the point is that according to Rashi here, Meirose is one of the stars, and it didn't come to help the Jews. And it came, in other words, the inhabitants of this star, Meirose, are being cursed by Dvorah, by the emissary of God, for not having come to assist the Jews in their battles against Sisera. So from here, Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan brings evidence that there is a strain of belief in Judaism in extraterrestrial life. And this extraterrestrial life, which existed on Meirose, they should have come along with the rest of the extraterrestrials and fought against Sisera and his army. Since they didn't fight against Sisera and his army, so therefore Torah curses them. Now, this is not the only interpretation of this pasuk. The Rashi brings down himself a different shot that Meirose was a city on earth, not some star or planet somewhere up in the sky. But that's not the point. The point is that here you see that there is a legitimacy to the assumption or to the belief that there are people or entities which exist on other planets. Now, I don't know either way, and I'm not taking sides in this, but there are from time to time meet people who are adamant in the assumption that according to Judaism there can be no extraterrestrial life, and this is false. This goes against, of course, an explicit pasuk in Shoftim. There are those who say, and I think Rabbi Kaplan is among them, and I don't understand it, that only we have free will, not extraterrestrials. In other words, free will is a uniquely human trait, and it's uniquely human because humans control all of the destiny of the universe, of the totality of the universe. And therefore we have free will, but no other entity does. This is difficult from this pasuk, because in this pasuk it seems that we're cursing the people of Meirose for deciding not to come to war. And if they don't have free will, it's not really fair to curse them, right? It's not their fault that they didn't come. So therefore it seems to indicate that they do have free will. Yeah?
So you're saying according to Torah, ET, definitely a possibility.
Yeah.
What? Why would God make?
Why did God make cockroaches?
I thought it's to annoy us, or certain flies or things, or animals that annoy us.
Okay, what about the fish at the very bottom of the sea?
They affect the ecology of the sea.
What?
They affect the ecology of the sea. They affect something on our planet.
So maybe these do too. Obviously they do. If that's the only issue which bothers you, so there is an impact. But I don't. According to the Rambam, We don't hold like the Rambam, generally speaking, but it's worthwhile bringing it up to the Rambam's issue here. The Rambam doesn't have this anthropocentric view of the world. He doesn't believe necessarily man is the sole purpose of creation. In other words, God is a great artist. Chazal say, "Ein sayor kelokenu." There's no artist like Hashem, and a great artist creates great art, and great art isn't necessarily limited to one form of art. So therefore, there can, according to the Rambam, many species or many entities exist as an expression of God's artistry, of God's craft and God's will to produce this incredibly complex and brilliant masterpiece, which is the universe. So there's no reason we need to assume that he didn't create other people or other creatures in other worlds as part and parcel of that. Or is there?
This is weird, that's all. I don't know. It's like,
I'll teach you about this tomorrow.
Yeah. It bothers you because it's weird?
because I kind of believed at one point, but like then I came to, I was like, oh, I was so stupid. I believed in aliens. Like, okay, I was on the wrong track, you know.
Okay, so there is no definitive proof either way. The fact, because here it's also machlekes in Chazal, or among the commentaries, but there certainly is. It's not contradictory to Judaism to assume that there is. Yeah.
When you said we don't hold by the Rambam, does that mean our opinion that we hold by it, that's the correct answer? What does it mean that we hold by someone if we don't know what the answer is?
It was a mistake. I shouldn't have expressed myself that way. I don't hold of what I just said. What I meant is that the mainstream of Jewish thought is not like the Rambam. But certainly, the Rambam is anything the Rambam said, by virtue of the fact that it was said by the Rambam, automatically becomes authoritative and legitimate. So we can't argue on the Rambam. We can say the mainstream Jewish thought has taken the position that the creation is indeed anthropocentric. It focuses on man and specifically on Klal Yisrael. Yeah. Okay. So so this pasuk, it's interesting. The Rambam writes that it's a story that there was a famous professor. His name was Professor Zev Lev, from professor, and he founded an institution in Yerushalayim which is called Machlin Lev, which is Jerusalem College of Technology, a place where people learn half a day and they go for technological expertise in the afternoon. So anyway, he had a discussion once with a Rosh Yeshiva, and this Rosh Yeshiva was convinced that there's one of the popular conspiracy theories that the astronauts never landed on the moon, because the Rambam says that the moon is a spiritual entity. Rambam, Maimonides. He said it Torah, yeah. He says it's an angelic entity, and therefore it's the way this Rosh Yeshiva understood the Rambam. Its mass is not the mass of actual matter, but the mass of some spiritual form of matter. So he said it must be that they never made it to the moon. So the Professor Lev asked him, there's a Rambam which says that you don't now I'll take money to learn in Kollel. What? Now I'll take money to learn in Kollel. So what do you do with that Rambam? So he said, okay, that's a difficult Rambam. We don't paskin like that Rambam, which is true. We don't. So Professor Lev said, okay, so this is also a difficult Rambam. We don't paskin like this Rambam either. That's one approach. Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky in his Sefer has a different approach, which was also interesting. He says that when the astronauts landed on the moon, it caused him a crisis of faith, because he figured if the Rambam could be wrong about this, maybe he's wrong about other stuff as well. And who says if you follow the Rambam, then you're doing the right thing? As long as you can assume that the Rambam was correct about everything. So then, okay, he's great about everything, he's obviously authoritative, so we listen to what he says. But once you can demonstrate that the Rambam made a demonstrable mistake, so then how can you ever rely on the Rambam? So he said, one second. So then he came up with a chiddush, which is true, but I don't know if you really have to come on to this. He said that there are parts of Mishnah Torah which are not halachic, which the Rambam put there in order to make up a holistic and complete body of knowledge. And one of them is his the discussion of physics as he perceived them to his time, which is in Hilchos Yisodei Torah. And the fact that the Rambam made a mistake in areas which are not actually halachic is not indicative of making a mistake in areas which are actually halachic, and therefore the Rambam's integrity is not impinged upon by the fact that he took the moon to be a spiritual object as opposed to a material one. Yeah.
It gives a distance for how far away the moon is from the earth, and how far the sun is, and how far Jupiter is. I mean, it seemed from the reading of Yisodei Torah that he assumed that everything out there was actually something that revolved.
I think he means that I think when he gives these instances, he means for astronomical calculations.
Right, so then he obviously believes that they have to be somewhere out there spinning around us.
Yeah, but they don't have to be material out there. It could be, green cheese, but it could be something else. It doesn't have to necessarily be actual rock, and it could be some sort of ethereal thing. Yeah.
I don't understand why this particular incident caused such a crisis of faith for Reb Yaakov Kavanetsky. I mean, there's certain instances, like say in a Gemara where two commentators are arguing, say about a historical event. One person says it's one day and someone says it's another day. One of them has to be wrong, I would assume. So it probably happens all the time that people are wrong. So why the fact that the Rambam was wrong in this particular case is it such a major problem for him?
Well, because the Gemara doesn't purport to be a code. It's not a code of Jewish law. It's a record, it's a log of discussions which took place in Batei Medrash. Right. So therefore, okay, you would expect that somebody would be, not necessarily correct. But the Rambam asserted that his code is the code to end all codes. And that what he says is backed by complete authority and complete correctness, obviously, complete truth. And therefore, it's much more of a problem for him if the Rambam comes out to be making a mistake than if, say, some machlekes in the Gemara. Yeah?
The Reform said they took out Kashem Shan that we say in Kish Levana we can't touch the moon, and they took that out because astronauts went to the moon.
I don't think they were saying Kiddush Levana before that.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm not so sure they were worried about this.
Okay, so let me just make my points. But people don't actually touch the moon with their feet, because if they touch the moon with their bare feet, their feet will melt. So maybe when the Rambam said about they can't touch it, he meant literally with...
But I don't understand what the big deal is. 99.99% of humanity ain't ever touching the moon under any circumstances, right? So therefore, I understand what the problem is with the pasuk, or rather the tefillah. You go try to touch the moon, right? It's not happening. So therefore, it never had. I never understood why people got so bothered by that. But yes, I acknowledge that you're right. There are people who got very bothered by that. It's a mystery to me. Yeah.
What about meaning that in the sense that it's a spiritual entity, like in reality, or it possesses a characteristic?
No, in reality. Is there a Rambam Sefer Mado here, the first line of the Rambam?
Yeah.
There's not going to be in the Frankel set. Maybe in the down there somewhere. Is there a Rambam? No, it's not that important. That green, no, it's a Mishnah Berurah. What is that?
Yeah.
That's Aleph Mado. So yeah, I believe he says the completely spiritual, not just that it has spiritual aspect to it.
So you held the same thing about the sun?
About the sun, I believe so as well. Yeah. But nobody's been to the sun, so...
I mean, it gives like heat, so... you sense some extent the physicality, physical effects of it.
Okay.
Like, how do we know that necessarily Rambam, held the way we think he actually holds? Like, you know, like he said that it's a spiritual entity. He never said, by the way, I mean this literally, it's spiritual. Like, we might just assume that it's, you know, just per se a spiritual entity. But really meant it's a spiritual entity, but really it's only a physical, big ball of mass.
Well, let's see. No, it could be you're right. This is what he says. He says, all the stars and all the spheres, kulam bali nefesh v'deya baskelim, they all possess a soul and knowledge and intellect. V'hem chaim v'omdim, and they are alive and they stand umakirim and they recognize as mishamar v'choya olam, he who spoke and created the universe. Kol echad echad, each one lefi godlo, according to his attainments, according to his spiritual heights, uvi malos, according to his attainments. Mishabchim u'farim, they praise and they give glory, liyotzim, to the Creator, kamo ha'malachim, like the angels. Ukshem shmakirim es HaKadosh Baruch Hu, just like these heavenly bodies recognize Hashem, kach makirim es atzim, so they recognize themselves. And they know and they recognize the angels who are above them. The intellect of the star, the wisdom of the stars and the spheres is less than the intellect of angels, and greater than that of the of human beings. So you're right, here he doesn't actually say that it is bereft of any physicality. He says that it has a spiritual nature to it as well. Okay, so yeah, could be, you could say like you're saying. It's possible. I'm not sure if it says something more explicit somewhere else, but according to what it says here, so that would seem to be the case. So what you're saying could be correct. Shkoyach. Okay.
If it says that, then what's Rabbi Yaakov's question on it?
Yeah, so it's a good question. Now I have to go back and look at Rabbi Yaakov and see why he felt it was a question. Because it seems from here that it's possible to say that it's not a question. It's a good point.
If you call something a sphere, then you're saying it has like shape and physicality to it. So then wouldn't you take that as something being a physical item? Yes.
Yeah, but he says about the spheres that they aren't physical, even though the heavenly sphere. By spheres he means the ancient astronomers held that there are strips in the sky in which the stars are embedded, and the strips move, and that's why constellations move around. If you've ever been to a what they're called, planetarium or a museum of astronomy, so the old globes, when they wanted to depict the heavens, were surrounded by strips of metal, some larger, some smaller. Has anybody ever seen that? A globe surrounded by a larger a group of spheres, so those are the spheres in which the stars are embedded and they travel. So Ram says those spheres, though, are not material spheres.
But his description given in yesterday's Torah seems to say that they're concentric, meaning they occupy space one within the other.
Right, but he says that einam lo kalim v'lo kvedim. They're not heavy, nor not light, nor heavy. Seems to indicate they have no mass whatsoever. Anyway, but you're right about the moon. It doesn't necessarily say that it doesn't have any mass whatsoever. Okay, so we have to go back and we'll consider what Rabbi Yaakov says. Let's do one more pasuk. Tevarach min Hashem Yoel Eshes Chever Akeni. So Dvorah comes and she blesses. She gives a bracha to Yoel, the wife of Chever Akeni. Minashim Boel Tevarach, and she is great from the women who are in the tent. Should be more blessed than them. And the question is, Chazal say that that she meant to praise Yoel to a greater extent than the mohos, than the matriarchs, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah, and that's Me'oel from the woes who were in the tent of the avos, of the forefathers. So the question is, why is Yoel more praiseworthy than the Emos, which came prior to her? And it would seem that the reason is like this. The reason is that the Rambam says that the reason why the Avos and Moshe Rabbeinu are regarded as so great in our history is because they were able to, at the same time they're involved in mundane activities of this world, to focus in their minds on Hashem. And they were able to have Hashem in front of them at the same time that they were dealing with commercial or social or any other type of mundane matter. That was what made them great. And certainly the Emos, we assume, were of the same level. The Emos were on the level, the mothers on the same level as the matriarchs, as the patriarchs. But there are times when it's much harder to focus on these things, even though they were focused on it when they were doing optional activities. Yoel was focused on the will of God when she was doing averos, when she was doing sins. Meaning that Yoel, we mentioned in the last chapter, is the paradigm of an avero lishma. An avero lishma means that you're doing a sin for the sake of heaven. And she sinned with Sisera in order to then eventually kill him. And she was focusing not on the pleasure or whatever tumah there is in avera, but the ultimate goal, which was to do something in order to be Mekadesh Shem Shamayim, in order to bring about something which is positive for God in this world. That's very hard, much harder to do. For us, it's well beyond what we are able to do, because it's hard for us to focus on God's will when we're doing optional activities. But Yoel's high madrega was that even when she was doing these an avera, she was doing it completely l'shem shamayim, and that's a very high level which very few people can actually achieve. And that's why an avera lishma is a very dangerous thing. To somebody to say, I want to go and sin for the sake of heaven, is dangerous for many reasons, but one of the most dangerous reasons is because maybe you're fooling yourself. Maybe you're really doing it because you want to do the avera. It's true, some positive ramification might come out of it, but that's not necessarily your intention. Your intention is to enjoy the sin that you're doing. So therefore, that's why Yoel was so praised, because even though she was doing a sin, which could have been very enjoyable, she was having intimate relations with Sisera. Nevertheless, Devorah testifies, she was doing completely for the sake of heaven, and that was a very tough and very praiseworthy thing. Yeah?
Adam sinned for Avera Lishma.
Yes, but he didn't he entered the sin lishma, but when he did the sin, he didn't do lishma. In other words, he made a conscious decision. You know what? This is what I should be doing. But once he was in it, that's what Chazal say, that when Hashem asked him, "Did you eat from it?" He said, "Yeah, achalti v'ochal od." I ate. I'm going to eat more. Given the opportunity, which is very strange. What do you mean you're going to eat more? We made a decision to do it. it should be a one-time thing, which you did because you had to do it. But once he got into it, he got swept up by the desire and by the emotion of the sin. So even Adam stumbled in that. Yeah. Yeah.
What other examples do we have of very short,
Very few. Esther is the other one, which is the famous example. Yaakov marrying two sisters. It's a famous example. But there are very few of them throughout Jewish history.
Why was Yael greater than Esther? That's what I want to know.
What?
Why was Yael's thing?
Not necessarily greater than Esther, but Dvorah didn't say she was greater than Esther. Esther wasn't on the scene yet. She was greater than Rivka, Rachel, and Leah.
Also, I heard a quoting, I don't know, to the Brisker, I don't know who it was, but some people say that Korach did a very Shema defining with emotion. Is that true?
Reb Tzadok says that.
Yeah.
But again, as Reb Tzadok says, his taina was a good taina. His claim, Kol Hayed Kol Flesh, we're all holy. He was right.
Yeah.
But he himself meant it for his own self-aggrandizement. So, yes, he deceived himself into thinking he was doing L'Shem Shamayim. But he really wasn't. So that's why it's so dangerous. Yeah.
How does a marriage Lishma work? Because if it's against halacha, so how could it be that it's doing the right thing? Meaning, isn't the halacha supposed to be built in? I thought
that's why Reb Chaim Volozhin says Aver Lishma was only permitted before Matan Torah, before Har Sinai. But it's very difficult to say that because of Yoel, right? And Esther, right? So you would have to say that either, according to Reb Chaim Volozhin, you have to say that they were Nevios, and therefore they had a special, dispensation which they received from God. But Aver Lishma, generally speaking, it's very difficult to know that it should be permitted. But all of us do it. Now we do it on small things. For example, has anybody here ever missed a minyan because it would create a big problem at home? Some of you are lying. Some of you are lying
What do you
here.
mean by big problem at home?
In other words, if you went to minyan now, right, this would seriously undermine your relationship with your parents, cause friction, or cause a chil Hashem in the aspect that people think you're really frummed out of your gourd, something like that. Who's coming up on? People have had this experience, right? We have all had this experience. So you didn't go to shul, right? That was an Aver Lishma.
Isn't minyan rabbinic at
whatever it is, it's not the same thing as having relations. They're relative. They're relatives. They're relative. Yeah, but halacha it's doicha kibbut avim. It's doicha kibbut avim. Going to minyan, it is, but we don't do it anyway, which is because we ourselves make these cheshbonos sometimes. So everything is relative. You can't decide. Okay, I'm not going to commit Aver Lishma of murder. That's not within your purview to make a decision like that.
So you could just miss minyan for...
I didn't say you could just miss minyan. It should be a wrenching and agonizing decision, but it does happen, yes. Yeah.
Because it was shocking, because Kol Hayed Derban Chayav Misa.
What?
I thought you can't be Hayed Derban because you Kol Hayed Derban Chayav Misa. It's a Gemara Bra.
It's not an Adera.
Oh.
It's not being a kind of a mitzvah. When I say Aver Lishma, I meant not necessarily an Aver Mamish.
That's talking about when the doctor goes out.
Yeah. Yeah.
So then, are we wrong to make such
No. Those are cheshbonos that even we can make. Even the morons can make. Right? The cheshbonos on a higher level, that's for special people to make. Okay, Rabbi Isai, we'll stop here. That's it for the year, although it's hard to speak about a 2.5 week break.